Hey, welcome to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist Podcast. Think Thursday is all about your beautiful, brilliant human brain. We're talking neuroscience. We're talking behavior change. We are talking about your mindset. Are you ready to get started? Let's go. Well, hello and welcome or welcome back to Think Thursday from the Alcohol Minimalist. We're here talking about that beautiful, brilliant human brain of yours. And this week we're wrapping up Mental Health Awareness Month. This month of May is Mental Health Awareness. And I wanted this final episode of Think Thursday to pull together some of the themes that we've explored throughout the month, because even though we've talked about different things, different topics each week, multitasking, movement, sleep, flourishing, and even the impact of living alongside mental illness, underneath all of those conversations is one very important truth. Our mental health is deeply connected to how safe, how honest, and regulated we allow ourselves to be emotionally. And that brings me to today's topic, which is emotional suppression and the hidden toll it can take on both the brain and the nervous system. I think many people move through life believing they are managing their emotions well, when in reality, they've simply become very skilled at overriding them. They push through, they stay productive, they take care of everyone else, they keep on performing, and they keep saying, "I'm fine." And to be clear, there's a big difference between emotional regulation and emotional suppression, even though the two are often confused. Emotional regulation is the ability to experience emotions without becoming completely consumed by them. Emotional suppression, on the other hand, is what happens when we attempt to minimize, ignore, numb, buffer, dismiss, or bury emotional experiences altogether because they feel inconvenient or uncomfortable or unsafe to acknowledge. And many of us learn to do this very early, maybe directly, maybe indirectly. Maybe you grew up in a home where difficult emotions were avoided or criticized, where staying calm and agreeable was valued more than being emotionally honest, or where there simply wasn't space for vulnerability because everyone else was already overwhelmed. Or maybe you just became the capable one, the dependable one, the person that learned that being needed felt safer than having needs of your own. And over time, emotional suppression can start to feel normal because externally, life may still appear functional. You go to work, you answer texts, you get things done, and you still show up for other people. But internally, the nervous system may be carrying an enormous amount of unprocessed emotional tension. And what's fascinating is that neuroscience research shows the body continues responding to emotions even when the conscious mind is trying to dismiss them. Psychologist James Gross at Stanford has spent decades studying emotion regulation, and his research has consistently found that emotional suppression increases physiological stress in the body, including activation of the sympathetic nervous system. And that is the system associated with that fight or flight mechanism and other survival responses. In other words, a person may appear calm on the outside, while internally their nervous system remains highly activated. And I think a lot of people know exactly what this feels like, even if they've never used the phrase emotional suppression before. It's saying you're not stressed while your shoulders ache from tension. It's insisting you're fine while your sleep keeps deteriorating. It's becoming emotionally reactive over small things because your nervous system has quietly been carrying too much for too long. And one of the reasons this matters so much is because suppressed emotions do not simply disappear. The brain still processes them. The body still responds to them. And eventually, the nervous system starts looking for relief. And sometimes that relief comes through healthy regulation, through movement, through rest, through connection, through therapy, maybe creativity, having talks, conversations, or simply slowing down enough to acknowledge what is happening emotionally for you and what's true. But of course, sometimes the brain searches for faster relief through coping behaviors like scrolling, overworking, emotional eating, and of course, around here, we got to talk about alcohol. We use coping behaviors not because people are weak, but because the nervous system is always trying to move away from discomfort and back towards regulation. And honestly, I think this is one reason so many high-functioning people can feel emotionally exhausted while simultaneously believing they have no reason to feel that way. Because functioning and emotional wellness are not the same thing. You can still be productive while emotionally disconnected from yourself. You can still be successful while chronically overwhelmed. You can still appear composed while internally living in a near constant stress response. Now, one of the most interesting areas of research related to emotional suppression comes from UCLA psychologist Matthew Lieberman and his work on something called affect labeling, which is essentially the process of identifying and naming emotional experiences. And what researchers found was surprisingly powerful. When people accurately named what they were feeling, activity in the amygdala, that's the part in the lower brain that is the threat detection center, activity in the amygdala decreased while activity increased in the areas of the prefrontal cortex associated with awareness and emotional regulation, simply by naming what people were feeling. In simple terms, naming emotions helped calm the nervous system, which is fascinating given when you think about how many people spend years trying not to feel what they feel. And this is something I talk about often in my work because one of the key steps in changing behavior is learning how to identify emotions clearly instead of simply reacting to them automatically. And many people move through life with very broad emotional language, or everything feels stressful or overwhelming or bad or frustrating. But emotional awareness becomes much more powerful when we slow down enough to get specific. Am I actually angry right now, or am I disappointed? Am I anxious, or am I afraid of uncertainty? Am I overwhelmed, or am I mentally exhausted from the story I keep repeating in my mind? Because this is another really important piece of the conversation. Circumstances themselves do not directly create feelings. Our thoughts about our circumstances create those feelings. And I know that can feel uncomfortable at first because most of us have been conditioned to believe that our emotional experience is caused entirely by what happens outside of us. But when you begin paying attention, you realize there is almost always a thought sitting between the circumstance and the emotional response. Two people can experience the exact same event and feel completely different emotions because they are interpreting the event through different thinking patterns. One person receives constructive feedback and thinks, "This is helpful, I can improve." Another person receives the same exact feedback and thinks, "I'm failing, I'm not good enough." Same circumstance, different thought, different emotional outcome. Now, this doesn't mean painful experiences aren't real, and it certainly doesn't mean we should force ourselves into fake positivity, but it does mean we have more agency than we often realize. Because when we become aware of our thoughts generating emotional responses, we create the possibility of changing those emotional experiences intentionally, rather than just living in default and remaining trapped inside automatic mental patterns. And honestly, I think this is where emotional suppression becomes particularly exhausting. Many people are trying to manage feelings without ever examining the thinking that is creating those feelings in the first place. They're attempting to silence emotional signals rather than listening to them and trying to understand them. Emotions are information. They aren't commands, they aren't facts, and they are not permanent identities. They are signals that deserve awareness and curiosity. I think many coping behaviors begin losing some of their intensity when people develop the ability to sit with emotions long enough to identify both the feeling and the thought underneath it. Because awareness creates space, and space creates choice. Which is why practices like journaling and mindfulness and therapy and coaching, of course, and honest self-reflection can feel so transformative. Not because they eliminate difficult emotions, but because they help people become conscious participants in their emotional experience instead of unconscious reactors to it. I think this conversation matters deeply during Mental Health Awareness Month because mental health is not only about diagnoses. Mental health is about nervous system health, emotional honesty, self-awareness, recovery, connection, the ability to acknowledge what's true instead of spending all of our energy pretending we're unaffected. Because eventually the nervous system asks for honesty. Sometimes quietly through exhaustion or numbness, sometimes loudly through anxiety, burnout, irritability, and coping behaviors that stop working the way they once did. Maybe one of the healthiest questions we can ask ourselves is not, what's wrong with me, but instead, what am I feeling and what am I thinking that's creating this feeling? That question shifts us out of shame and into awareness. And awareness is where change begins. We cannot change what we cannot see. So if you've been feeling emotionally flat lately, unusually reactive maybe, or chronically overwhelmed, disconnected from yourself, maybe the answer is not that you're broken or that you're failing or that something's wrong with you. Maybe your nervous system is simply tired of carrying emotions that have gone unnamed for too long. Thanks for spending a few minutes with me today. Thanks for spending this whole month thinking alongside me about what it means to really support mental health in everyday life. Because the truth is, mental health is not built through one giant breakthrough movement. It's shaped gradually through how we think, how we rest, how we move, how we connect, and how honestly we allow ourselves to experience being human. Being human is 50-50, folks. 50% good, 50% crap. And, we've got to learn to live through all of it. All right. That's all I have for you this week, my friends. Until next time, choose peace, and I will see you on Monday.